As an investor, you want to invest in what's inevitable. The growth of Asia as a powerhouse and many economies in here as powerhouses, it's inevitable. While that inevitability is not necessarily clear.
Hello everyone from the beautiful Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. This is the Tax Terminator. I am back as usual. And today I'm joined by the wonderful Alexander Torrenegra. We're going to be chatting about some very interesting things. Thank you for being here. Gracias por estar aquí.
No, thank you for inviting me.
Oh, thank you. So we're here in the beautiful Malaysia. Is this the first time coming? Have you been here before?
First time in Malaysia.
Nice. Initial opinions of the city, KL, the country?
It's a wonderful mixture of, I don't know why they call it a developing economy, because it's significantly developed. It's quite a contrast.
That's interesting. And for somebody who lives in California and was originally from Colombia, you've seen different levels of development for sure.
Yep. Yeah. No,
wow. So top things you have enjoyed about coming to Malaysia, like your top best, and then your top things you would be like, oh, maybe, not the best.
I cannot complain about anything, really. So food is amazing. The knowledge that I've been able to gather at the event. Also, I thought that I was significantly sophisticated, but I've gotten a few interesting tips from you guys. So that's been significant. It's been only 24 hours, so I have a lot to explore.
Well, fantastic. Well, may the first 24 hours be the symbol for the next days ahead. All right, this is cool. So Alexander, you are known both in Latin America and the US as a top tier investor, mostly in the tech sector. Tell us a bit about that. Tell us a bit about your journey as an investor, what drove you to become an investor, and how you see the cross-border investment world right now in 2025.
So indeed, most people know me as an investor, but my passion has always resided mostly as an entrepreneur. And within being an entrepreneur is mostly about being an innovator. Like my oldest memory in life is the first time I saw a computer, and I played with a computer when I was 4 years of age. So fast forward, I became an entrepreneur as early as when I was 14, and I needed 14.
Wow.
I needed to become an entrepreneur because I needed to do some kind of business to be able to buy my first computer. We didn't have enough money to do that. So, and then fast forward again, I've created a few companies that fortunately have been successful enough for me not only to be able to invest in more and more companies of my own that we operate, but also to invest in other people's companies. And so ergo, my career as an investor started in 2010. I'm potentially the first angel investor that existed in Colombia and one of the first ones in Latin America, even though I was already based out of California. The companies I've created have had personnel all over the world, and in particular in Latin America, I've been exposed to a lot of early stage deals. So I started to invest, and fortunately, I've been able to get access to some good investments. And then fast forward again, Sonny, who owns the Shark Tank franchise.
Yes, I was coming to that. So we have a Shark Tank superstar with us today, and I was hoping you would mention that. All right, go on. So Shark Tank, what happened?
So Sonny expanded. So it's a franchise that started in Japan under the name Tiger's Den, and then went on to other countries. And in the US, it started under the brand Shark Tank, which is the brand that we all know today. And in 2017, they decided to expand into Latin America. So they launched Shark Tank Colombia, Shark Tank Mexico, Shark Tank Brazil. And they asked around, and people suggested me as one of the people they wanted to have as one of the central sharks. They invited me. I asked them whether it was scripted or not. I learned that no, it's not scripted. Like it's the real deal.
It's the real deal.
It's the real deal. Of course, there is a lot of due diligence happening after that. Usually the pitches are in real life an hour, but they edit it down to 15 minutes, 10 minutes, depending on the pitch. So I became a shark. And
I'm here with a real life shark.
Yes.
Very good. So for those of you, I think it's unlikely, but for those of you who may not know, potentially, this is the same show where you find people like Kevin O'Leary in the US version. So these are people that have been successful, like Alexander, and they hear basically the presentations of multiple aspiring entrepreneurs who hope to get capital to grow their business. Now, the interesting thing that I see in your case is that you're now based in California.
Yes.
But A lot of your angel investing, as you mentioned earlier, has been in Latin America, in your native home of Colombia, and then a couple of other places that we were able to mention off camera. So it's interesting because a lot of US VCs or angel investors in general are very US focused. And sometimes, I would say only a minority of them really look beyond the United States in terms of potential investments. So what drove you, being in the world's largest economy, to keep that link to your homeland in Colombia, keep that link to Latin America, and to eventually find investment opportunities in Latin America?
So it's a couple of reasons. The first one is I actually lived in New York City the first decade or so of living in the US. And whenever I travel to San Francisco and the Bay Area, I figured that a lot of people were helping other people significantly, and that created an ecosystem in the Bay Area that I couldn't see in New York. And that's why I ended up moving to the Bay Area. And
so you're currently in the Bay Area, so
I'm in
San
the Bay
Francisco.
Area. Well, I'm in Napa.
Okay,
but
Napa, okay. We're famous for the wine.
Yes, indeed. And I figured that, in turn, that it was very important for successful entrepreneurs to help upcoming entrepreneurs that were just getting started. And you can do that in many ways. One of them is investing in their companies. And if you are good at what you do, then those investments are going to end up not only having a good impact, but also are going to end up giving you a good return.
Especially because you're entering very early on. So the returns can be potentially exponential, huge.
Yeah. And the risk is huge. It's usually binary, but binary in terms of you get back 0 to 30x, 50x, 100x. For the most part, something that I try to teach others that ask me about investment is invest in things you know.
That's very powerful. That's very powerful in that idea, because I've seen a lot of people who have a background in, let's say, one industry, and they try to invest in another. And more often than not, it doesn't go well. So for example, in your case, you mentioned you had a passion for computers. That's what drove you to start your first business. So I'm guessing all of the investments, or most of them, tech-oriented?
Yes, and also because I live in California, and I understand living in Silicon Valley is like living 3-5 years ahead of everyone else in terms of technology. Like today is very common in San Francisco, see cars driving around on their own. And 5 years down the line, we're going to be seeing that in pretty much any major city. But the point is, by living in California, I get to see where the world is going. And by being Colombian and having talent, because a lot of the people that we hire for the companies I created are based in Latin America, I can connect the dots in ways that it's not easy for other people to connect them, or at least where I'm going to have some kind of competitive advantage. If I use that knowledge to decide where to invest and how to invest and what to coach the up-and-coming entrepreneurs in Latin America. So that's why, unlike the traditional angel investor in the Bay Area, I end up investing a lot in Latin America.
Okay, very interesting. And so you see a lot of tech, obviously, like you just said, in the Bay Area, like cars driving by themselves, all of that. Do you see that tech eventually also arriving in Latin America? Like, has it been your experience that these innovations ultimately do reach the Latin American market on a massive scale? Or is there still a huge gap between the US and Latam in that regard?
Yes to all of the above. There is a gap, but not always the technologies that end up being adopted by Latin America are technologies that come from the US. There are many tech companies today that have replicated business ideas and technology that were first deployed in China or Southeast Asia, where for multiple reasons, the market dynamics are closer to the market dynamics of Latin America. And that means that it makes sense for Latin America to copy that coming from
Right, because growing countries usually, let's say a poor population, maybe not yet completely online savvy, like the United States.
And a big portion is the significant income disparity that there are in the economies, plus how digitalized fintech is on each one of those given markets.
Very interesting. Is there any particular market in Latin America that you feel is very hot for tech? Like your experience investing in these tech companies, if there are other entrepreneurs out there or investors, and they say, okay, so Alexander, what is your top pick of the top markets for tech companies in Latin America?
So today is anywhere. Historically speaking, the two countries that have created the most tech unicorns have been Argentina and Brazil.
Really?
Brazil, just
Argentina, I would have never guessed it.
Yeah. So in fact, all of the companies from Latam that came on that first tech wave of the early 2000s came from Argentina.
Wow.
I mean, companies worth hundreds of billions of dollars today started back in the day in Argentina, but Argentina, being a relatively small market, pushed them to think pan-Latin America. They had to go to Brazil, they had to go to Colombia, had to go to Mexico. Today, we see more diversity in terms of where technology is being created and innovated. So today I don't focus in a given country in particular. I just try to identify where the best entrepreneurs are and where the best opportunities are, and I go after them very quickly. In Latin America, if you know what you're doing, you're going to be expanding from one country to several countries, regardless of where you got started.
Okay, interesting. So for you, it's more about the entrepreneur behind the idea, the fundamentals of the company, regardless of where it's created.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Especially at early stage. Later on, it's a different ballgame, but in early stage, what you're betting on is on the entrepreneur.
So that means if you reverse the question and I ask you, are there any jurisdictions that you wouldn't touch even with the best of ideas? You wouldn't really have any concrete examples.
An unpopular opinion I have with many governments in Latin America is that I invite entrepreneurs, mostly tech entrepreneurs, not to incorporate in their country where they live, but to incorporate in either the Cayman Islands or Uruguay.
That's very interesting. Okay.
So for the most part, yeah, I don't hold investments for the most part, no. I actually don't hold investments personally in countries other than those two in Latin America. Well, Cayman Islands, not Latin America, but
yeah, in the Caribbean region, yeah.
Yeah, but most Latin American companies that know what they are doing, they are either incorporated there or in Uruguay.
And that's very interesting because oftentimes what I talk about as the tax terminator on this channel, and has been my personal experience, is that a lot of people in Latin America sometimes don't realize that you can be a Latam business in the sense of your consumers, where they're located, but for corporate governance and potential dispute resolution and all of that, you can be in the US, you can be in the Caymans, you can be, like you said, in Uruguay. We were talking earlier, I mean, I like Panama, but you said, not necessarily on your radar. So it is very interesting, very interesting. Now, it is, again, very, let's say, relevant that you mentioned Uruguay, because I just mentioned Uruguay in my talk here. Uruguay is getting a lot of traction. So I wanted to ask you, why do you like Uruguay?
Uruguay is becoming the Delaware of Latin America. So they have created and pursued a strategy towards being business friendly that not only is easy to understand for the average Latin American investor and corporate attorney, but it's also easy to understand for the investor coming from the US and the attorneys coming from the US. So as an angel investor, I need to make sure that whatever investment I make is going to be in a company that eventually is going to be able to raise additional capital from other angels, but more importantly, from VCs and eventually even IPO.
Right.
And
because you're thinking about taking these businesses public.
Yes, that's how I'm going to be making money. Either they go public or they get acquired by a larger company. And it's much easier for a company that operates in Latin America to be acquired by a company in the US or by any global company if that company is incorporated in a jurisdiction that is friendly with regulations. In the case of the Cayman Islands, they pretty much copy Delaware regulations. So it's much easier for an attorney to go through all of the paperwork needed if you're buying a company that is incorporated there.
Yeah, all the
even if the
diligence
company
and
is
everything.
operating somewhere else.
Yeah, no, of course. It's very interesting that you mention it. I've been working with Panama for a really long time. I also find that constant reference to Delaware, and a lot of their laws have also, copied Delaware to an extent. I find it so interesting. Now, Uruguay is often, a more quiet player in the field, so I think it's interesting. Do you see a lot of American VCs setting up shop in Uruguay, at least a representation office, or is it still more like when it happens, it's good that it's there, but not a lot of people are aware of that?
So it did happen in Brazil. And where we saw some of the largest VC players, such as Sequoia, opening offices in the middle of the 2010s, like a decade ago. But most of them have closed shop in those places, in part because the Brazilian hype of tech innovation and what has happened after the recent tech bubble exploded has led to the Latin American market not being as attractive today compared to other opportunities such as AI. AI is really not being developed in Latin America today. AI is being developed primarily in the US. So investors are looking more into that at the moment. Many things came out quite positively from those things. I mean, Nubank, which was the largest IPO 2-3 years ago, was actually founded by the partner of Sequoia that opened Sequoia in Brazil.
Oh, really?
Okay. Yeah, he left and he started Nubank, and today he is the richest person in Colombia.
Oh,
because
very
he's
nice.
from Colombian origin.
Okay.
He's
Very
the richest, not person, he doesn't live in Colombia, he lives in Uruguay, but he's the richest
Just
Colombian.
Yeah, the richest Colombian national.
Yeah.
Right. I bet he's very happy in Uruguay with that territorial tax system. I mean, he must be very, very happy.
Yep.
All right, interesting. And so when you look at, for example, AI, you said mainly being developed in the United States. Do you think there is potential, you as a tech investor, would you see AI somehow moving from the US to Latin America, not from a user perspective, but from a development perspective? Do you see that happening?
So there are two layers of AI development. There is foundational development, and that is the very hardcore deep tech innovation that is happening that not only requires good talent, but requires a humongous amount of computing power. Some of which, by the way, it's being grown here in Malaysia, and China as well, of course, is a powerhouse on that regard. So Latin America not only doesn't have that level of investment, it doesn't even have the energy creation capabilities to be able to host the data centers needed to be able to do this kind of thing.
So the infrastructure is lacking, basically.
Yes. And even in what we will call developed countries, the amount of energy that this type of AI development requires is so high that it's really stretching the limit of what
the current
energy supply capabilities are. So then there is applied AI, and that is with those models, what can you build? And that is going to be spread all over the place. I already invested in a couple of companies that are using that AI and applying it to very interesting use cases, not only Latin America, but also in many other places.
You have mentioned Asia a couple of times. I know Asia is not necessarily the area of the world where you invest the most, where you spend the most time, but obviously Asia and Latin America to an extent are a bit rivals. So some people are more Latam focused, some people like Asia and believe Asia is the future. Where do you see that situation from an investor economics perspective, Latin America versus Southeast Asia?
This is an unpopular opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Asia.
Asia, really?
Yes. There is an interesting theory of conflict that partially explains why Latin America has lagged in terms of development in certain aspects, and that is Latin America has been relatively peaceful. Like we don't fight wars in Latin America the way that we've seen those wars happening here in Asia. And that has led to a low level of nationalism that leads in turn to a lot of internal conflict, because we don't have a common enemy, then we fight internally.
Yeah,
and that has, and again, this is a theory, but I believe that it's
right, because I get what you mean. Most of the violence, like for example, Colombia and Mexico is the drug cartels, and then you have the guerrilla in Colombia and all of that. Right? It's not. I get what you mean. It's not nation on nation conflict.
Exactly. Which that type of nationalism that you get to see here in Asia is what lead nations to really push hard at developing infrastructure, at developing military capabilities, at developing the infrastructure needed to be able to keep up and show we know what we are doing.
We can beat you.
We can beat you, right? That doesn't happen in Latam. So
we're too busy going to the beach.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that's something that for that to change in Latam, it is going to take multiple generations. So at least for the remainder of the 2000s, I wouldn't bet as much in Latin America as I would bet in Asia. Now, again, Latin America is a market that I know, so I know where to identify those gems, those opportunities. But if you are just getting started looking at different markets, unless you partner up with someone that knows a lot about the market, I think that your time is going to be better invested
in Asia.
In Asia,
it would be easier to find promising opportunities in Asia than in Latin America.
As an investor, you want to invest. By the way, that's not my motto, but it's very pragmatic. As an investor, you want to invest in what's inevitable. The growth of Asia as a powerhouse, and many economies in here as powerhouses, it's inevitable. While that inevitability is not necessarily clear in Latam.
I see. So obviously, you're saying everything you've explained. Asia has maybe more potential. You see more of that strive to succeed. But at the same time,
I think that both have potential.
oh, of course,
but it's being realized faster here.
In Asia, yes. But what I also wanted to touch upon is, at the same time, Latin America has had more economic development and more success stories than, for example, Africa. So Latin America is like stuck in the middle, in a way. Why do you think overall that is? I mean, you've explained why Latin America, in your view, maybe hasn't reached its potential like Asia is reaching it, in your view, faster. But what has prevented Latin America from staying behind like Africa has? Why is Latin America like stuck in that trap where it's like middle income, middle development, some rare gems, but ultimately overall, you don't reach that level of development?
Well, for one, a significant good amount of natural resources. It's pretty much every country in Latam has something that has created enough natural resources for the economies to flourish. Starting with Peru and the Spaniards getting as much silver as possible from there, going to Chile today with copper and other minerals, etc., etc. So that's one. The other one, I would go back to the Monroe Doctrine, having the U.S. a kind of a protector of the rest of Latin America, that has enabled Latin America to be at relative peace, making progress. Not progress as fast as some countries in conflict can do, but making nonetheless some type of progress that we don't get to see in many African nations.
So kind of like a perfect cocktail to keep us in the middle.
Yep.
Okay. Interesting. And so when you talk about technology, you've also mentioned natural resources just now. In Latin America, would there be opportunities in merging technology with natural resources? Could that be a sweet spot?
There are. And I've invested in a couple of them. I've seen
really?
some companies, and I've invested in a bunch that are doing that, are taking unique challenges for the natural resources that they handle, and agriculture as well, and coming up with solutions that are unique to what they have, what they need to solve, that don't happen anywhere else, because it's a unique problem to that.
It's because the oil is there, or the gold, or the copper, or whatever that may be. Okay. And so we will see, I guess, in the coming decades, if Latin America's natural resources end up, lifting the economy more, towards a developed stage. I mean, I don't know. Could you think a natural resource-based economy can sustain a strong middle class sufficiently big to develop the Latin American market?
Unless there is a significant reduction in population, no.
Which will ultimately happen because people are not having kids.
Yeah, exactly. So it's difficult to tell which one is going to have a more significant weight. But for the most part, for you to have a developed economy, you want to be industrialized, and that's not happening in Latin America significantly. Brazil, it's a different. So you have the two portions. You have Brazil, which is half of Latam, and you have the rest of Latam, all of
Spanish-speaking and Portuguese-speaking.
So the most industrialized country is Brazil, followed by Mexico, just because of how much opportunity there is with the U.S. But most of the Mexican industrialization, it's really dependent on business ties with the U.S. as opposed to the Brazilian one,
like the maquinadoras and all of this in the border. Okay.
Yeah. For the rest, no, we do have in Latin America to move from selling what is under our feet to selling what comes out of our heads. And that requires generations of mindset shift that hopefully are going to get us there, but it's not going to be an easy path.
Do you think Latin America can leapfrog into it? So potentially, do it faster if we get our act together?
Not with the current democratic systems in Latin America. I think that while democracy is really good for many economies, in Latin America is in a position where democracies are just dragging them down. So unless there is some kind of benevolent dictatorship, that leapfrogging is not going to be happening.
Wow. So the only scenario where you see it possible is a benevolent dictatorship.
The most likely, yes.
Okay.
Not the only one, but the most likely for that to happen, yes.
Is there any country in Latin America where you see this potentially happening?
Not at the moment.
Not at the moment, okay. And with regards to your comment on democracy, I really find that interesting. Why do you believe
Also, another very unpopular opinion. But
Listen, we're all about unpopular opinions, so no worries. Why do you think that is? Why do you believe democracy is driving down economic growth in Latin America?
For a democracy to work, the population needs to be savvy about the decisions they are making. And as Plato wrote about many centuries ago, millennia ago, one of the risks of democracy is having people that are not well-versed on what's actually happening, making those kind of decisions. You end up with some kind of soft control that really only benefits a few, but everyone thinks that they are actually being part of the system, when in reality they are not. The average IQ here in Southeast Asia is around 105 points. The average IQ in Latam is 87, partially because of nutrition, but also partially because of education and other factors. We don't have a population in Latin America that is going to be, for the most part, not every single country, but most countries, that is going to be able to make good democratic decisions the way the systems work today. We need to revamp the education system in most countries to be able to eventually get to democracies that are functional, that don't have the level of corruption that we have today, that have the level of sophistication needed to be able to push forward the way that we have been able to see in other places as well. The country, going back, the country that might do that leapfrogging, maybe even with a democracy, is Argentina, and to some extent
With
Brazil.
Javier Milei? With Javier Milei?
No, just because of they have the largest middle class in Latam. Like the population is.
I would have thought Chile had the largest.
The income disparity in Chile is larger than Argentina, if I'm not mistaken. I cannot say if the current government is going to be the one doing it, but they do have that kind of mentality and investment on education that unfortunately is lacking in other countries.
All right. And so, final question, I want to get your thoughts on this. You talked about democracy, obviously, for a long time, and I believe still people see it that way. The United States has been perceived as the world's greatest democracy, the best experiment in democracy. Many people would challenge that and say it's a constitutional republic, not a democracy. I think that's another debate. But for argument's sake, let's say it is a democracy. And then you have, on the other side of the Pacific Ocean, China, obviously the big contender. Some people would have thought China by this time would have taken over as the dominant power. It hasn't. I see many challenges there. But can U.S. democracy or constitutional republicanism still function while ensuring the U.S. retains its position as the dominant world power vis-a-vis China, in your view?
I believe that both systems have many pros and many cons, and my wish, and to some extent what I predict, is that we are going to see those two powers checking the balances of each other, a mutual check and balance of sorts, each one with a significantly different system, but overall, hopefully, systems that end up working together, not by design, but by coincidence, by default. The ideal scenario for all of us as humans is to have different systems constantly competing, because that's what leads to innovation. If we have
a very free market approach to that.
Yes. If we have a system that ends up dominating, it's going to eventually stagnate. But you have two systems that kind of work, each one significantly different than the other, are going to continue trying to improve, which is going to lead to the one improving as well. One of the best gifts I had for my first internet startup was having a competitor that was more or less our same size, and that everything we did that was good, they will copy us. And every now and then they will do something that was interesting and we copy them. If it weren't because they existed, our company would have not progressed as much as we end up doing. Competition is really
So ultimately, a very positive outlook where the U.S. and China would compete and then ultimately improve each one of their systems moving forward.
I believe that's the case. It's
All
not
right.
going to be easy, but I do think that's what we are going to be seeing for the next 5 decades or so.
Well, if it was easy, it wouldn't be fun.
Yeah.
All right. On that positive note, thank you, everyone. Wonderful conversation with Alexander. Alexander, muchas gracias. Thank you for being here.
Gracias.
Thank you.